Did you know that New Haven could have been home of the nation's first HBCU? What follows is the story of a path-breaking plan for a black college in New Haven in 1831, and of the opposition that stopped it from happening. New Haven in 1831 was the co-capital of Connecticut, as it would remain until 1875. An impressive new state house had just opened on the New Haven Green, behind the Center Church and right across College Street from Yale. For white business and civic leaders, New Haven was a city on the rise. It was a center of education and publishing. Noah Webster had just completed the epic American Dictionary of the English language in 1828. Connecticut had the highest college matriculation rate in the nation and the highest literacy rate. In 1830, New Haven was the nation's 23rd largest city with a population of almost 11,000. Wealth was accumulating for white elites. Manufacturing was growing. Immigration from Europe was on the rise. The first steamboat service between New Haven and New York City started in 1815. The Farmington Canal opened in 1828. Signs of prosperity included the Hill House Mansion, Sachem's Wood, built just north of the town center in 1829. On the Green, local Congressman Ralph Ingersoll built an impressive red brick house in 1829. Slavery, though not widespread, remained legal. Connecticut was the last state in New England to formally abolish slavery in 1848. New Haven was home to nearly 600 free black people and 4 enslaved people in 1830. Free black people still faced severe restrictions on their liberty. Black men were barred from voting. Economic and educational opportunities for black people were extremely limited. At the same time, black women and men were organizing churches and building community institutions, creating their own spaces of liberation. Meanwhile, by 1830, Yale was the nation's largest college. Yale had 469 total students enrolled, male, Protestant, and of European descent. This was the setting in New Haven at the time when a bold proposal was made to create the nation's first college for black men. Why did this happen in 1831? And why New Haven? 1831 was the dawn of the Abolition movement. The previous year, in September 1830, black leaders from throughout the antebellum North had gathered at Mother Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia. That convention was the meeting that launched a movement, the Abolition movement, the movement for black freedom. Bishop Richard Allen gave the main address at his church at that 1830 convention. Delegates included New Haven's Scipio Augustus. This black freedom movement had a few white allies, including New Haven's Simeon Jocelyn and his Boston friend, William Lloyd Garrison, who began publishing the abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, in 1831. New Haven black leaders John Creed and J.L. Cross became agents for The Liberator that year. Augustus and Creed were leaders in New Haven's newly organized Black Congregational Church, formerly known as the African Ecclesiastical Society and officially known as the Temple Street Congregational Church. They had established the church beginning in 1820. Other early leaders included Prince Cooper, Prince Duplex, William Lanson, and Bias Stanley. These black founders had called Simeon Jocelyn, a white pastor and abolitionist, as their minister beginning in 1824. On May 28, 1831, Jocelyn wrote to Garrison about an idea to establish a college for young black men. Jocelyn told Garrison that he had met with the Reverend Peter Williams, a black leader in New York, about a mutual interest in education. Williams and Jocelyn decided to merge their interest for a new college.
This would connect the mechanic arts and some degree of agriculture and horticulture, as well as be connected with many useful pursuits, and with the advantages of domestic and social life, as would prepare the young men for active life, and to aid their brethren in other places, in all those things which make men happy, and which give them as individuals, and as communities, influence in the world.
Jocelyn stated that Arthur Tappan, a New York philanthropist and abolitionist who had a second home in New Haven, supported the plan and had committed $1,000. He noted that a site had been chosen in the southern section of New Haven. A newspaper notice later in 1831 reports the extensive establishment in New Haven, formerly known as the Steamboat Hotel, and laterally as Dwight's Gymnasium or Gymnasium for Boys, has been purchased by a Mr. Jocelyn and is to be converted into a college for blacks. This means that the site for the college would have been on Water Street between East and Wallace Streets, an intersection that sits now underneath the junction of two major highways, I-91 and I-95. Jocelyn asked Garrison to accompany him and Arthur Tappan to present the whole plan
at the Convention of the People of Color, who meet the week after next in Philadelphia.
Jocelyn, Tappan, and Garrison went to the first annual convention of the People of Color at Philadelphia's Wesley Church. As recorded in the proceedings of the 1831 convention, they made a presentation to the delegates, the leadership of the black community in the antebellum North, and there was agreement to organize the college. The proceedings record why New Haven was proposed as the site for the nation's first black college.
First, the site is healthy and beautiful. Second, its inhabitants are friendly, pious, generous, and humane. Third, its laws are salutary and protect all without regard to complexion. Fourth, boarding is cheap and provisions are good. Fifth, the situation is as central as any other that can be obtained with the same advantages.
The sixth reason is New Haven carries on an extensive West Indian trade, and with abolition of the slave trade and growing free black communities in the Caribbean that
many of the wealthy colored residents in the islands would no doubt send their sons there to this new college to be educated, and thus a fresh tie of friendship would be formed, which might be productive of much real good in the end. And last, though not least, the literary and scientific character of New Haven renders it a very desirable place for the location of the college.
This alliance in 1831 between black leaders and white allies to establish a black college in New Haven marked a truly revolutionary turn in the history of race relations in the United States. The proceedings noted the convention would wish it to be distinctly understood that the trustees of the contemplated institution shall a majority of them be colored persons. The number is proposed 7, 3 white and 4 colored. The convention was held June 6 to 11th, 1831. Jocelyn, Garrison, and Tappan were invited to speak on June 8th. The delegates endorsed the proposed college and identified agents to lead the fundraising, with the Reverend Samuel Cornish as general agent and Tappan as treasurer. Several provisional committees were established, with free black leaders in 14 communities, including New Haven, with Bias Stanley, John Creed, and Alexander C. Luca. Garrison visited New Haven not long after the convention in late June and gave 2 public addresses. He would speak and write about the college proposal in the following weeks and months, including pieces circulated through The Liberator. The proposal was noted in the July 30th, 1831 edition of the New York Evangelist newspaper, which described the work of black leaders and philanthropic white allies to establish a college at New Haven, with $10,000 to be raised among white donors and $10,000 from black donors. The newspaper said, "The idea is a good one. We wish success to the undertaking with all our heart." On September 5, 1831, the Provisional Committee of Philadelphia published an appeal to the benevolent in that city's Chronicle newspaper, outlining plans for the Black College in New Haven. Back in New Haven, Simeon Jocelyn gave an address on Wednesday, September 7, 1831, at the Third Congregational Church on the subject of the moral, intellectual, and civil improvement of the people of color in the United States. No doubt, he promoted plans for the new Black College as he discussed abolition and anti-slavery efforts. Around the same time, on September the 6th, the first notice appeared in New Haven newspapers of the insurrection in Virginia known as Nat Turner's Rebellion. One paper noticed, quote, "The insurrection in Virginia appears to have been very easily suppressed." Many historians cite the news of Nat Turner's rebellion as a factor in the reaction by whites to the college in New Haven in the following days. The day after Jocelyn's address, on Thursday, September 8th, New Haven Mayor Dennis Kimberly, a graduate of Yale, gave notice of an extraordinary meeting of the freedmen, i.e. the white property owners, for 2 days later on Saturday, September 10th.
To either of the sheriffs of the city of New Haven, greeting. You are hereby required to warn the freemen of said city to meet at the city hall in said city on Saturday, the 10th day of September 1831 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to take into consideration a scheme said to be in progress for the establishment in this city of a college for the education of colored youth, and to adopt such measures as may be deemed expedient relative to the same, and to do any other business proper for said meeting. Hereof fail not, and do return make. Given under my hand by advice of the aldermen in the city of New Haven this 8th day of September 1831, Dennis Kimberly, Mayor.
Juxtaposed to the notice by the mayor about the meeting on the Black College, there's another notice, just underneath, of the preliminary meeting of the alumni of Yale College to be held a few days after the Saturday town meeting on Tuesday, September 13th. The Saturday, September 10th meeting was held in the State House, the co-capitol building that had just opened that year, which had a space for town hall meetings. A contemporary account describes that intense afternoon. Quote, "So great was the interest to hear the discussion that notwithstanding the excessive heat and the almost irrespirable atmosphere of the room, the hall was crowded throughout the afternoon. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of white men packed into a 3,000 square foot room in the State House on a hot Saturday afternoon." The meeting voted 700 against the college and only 4 in favor.
Its inhabitants are friendly, pious, generous, and humane.
The reports in the newspaper note that the meeting was addressed against the college by 4 people: Isaac Townsend, Ralph Ingersoll, Nathan Smith, and David Daggett. Only Simeon Jocelyn spoke in favor. On the table were resolutions put forward by a committee that Dennis Kimberly, the mayor, had appointed. It had 10 people, at least 6 of whom were Yale alums: Simeon Baldwin, William Bristol, Samuel Hitchcock, Ralph Ingersoll, Augustus Street, and Isaac Townsend. They were top figures of civic, legal, and political leadership. Ingersoll was the congressman, Baldwin had been mayor of New Haven, and Hitchcock was a leading lawyer. Of the 4 who spoke against the college, David Daggett was at the time Associate Justice of Connecticut Superior Court. The next year, he would be Chief Justice of Connecticut Supreme Court. He was, along with Hitchcock, a founder of the Yale Law School. Their resolutions had 2 parts. The first began, quote,
The immediate emancipation of slaves in disregard of the civil institutions of the states in which they belong, and as auxiliary thereto the contemporaneous founding of a college for educating colored people, is an unwarrantable and dangerous interference with the internal concerns of other states and ought to be discouraged.
In other words, New Haven's leadership voted 700 to 4 in support of maintaining slavery in the nation. The second part of the resolution said,
Yale College, the institutions for the education of females, and the other schools already existing in this city are important to the community and the general interests of science, and as such have been deservedly patronized by the public. And the establishment of a college in the same place to educate the colored population is incompatible with the prosperity, if not the existence, of the present institutions of learning, and will be destructive of the best interests of the city. We will resist the establishment of the proposed college in this place by every lawful means.
In other words, the new black college would be a threat to Yale and other schools in town. The white supremacist sentiments in New Haven are well documented in contemporary newspaper accounts, as are its ties to the South. One paper wrote, "Here we have Yale College, among the highest ornaments of which are sons of Southern planters. We have several most respectable institutions for the instruction of young ladies, some of whom are from the South. There is no other town or city that would suffer as much if such a college, a black college, were built." Another New Haven paper said, "The establishment of a college here would ring throughout the land a summons that would hurry in the blacks as bees to a hive. It would communicate to the world the impression that New Haven was overrun with a vicious population, for throughout the United States, vice is uniformly associated with a large colored population." On Saturday, September 10th, white New Haven voted down a new black college. Just a few days later, it would celebrate its existing college. The town meeting was not the final impact of the black college decision. The town meeting on Saturday, September 10th, 1831, and the massive opposition to the college fueled white rage that continued in the weeks afterward. Riotous spirit and riotous action were documented in the papers of the time. The Liberator in October has an article about riots at New Haven. It notes, the New Haven home of Tappan, the New York philanthropist and abolitionist, had been attacked. It notes that a house owned by a black person on Mount Pleasant in New Haven had been, quote, leveled to the ground. A Philadelphia newspaper reported, around this time on Thursday evening, a black man was knocked down in the streets, and on Friday evening, the house of the most respectable gentleman was assailed with shouts, indecent songs, and a shower of stones. There were many reports of such activity. New Haven was the talk of the nation, and even the toast of white Southerners. New Haven's decision, 700 to 4, against the black college in 1831, was celebrated by many voices in the slaveholding South. A Georgia newspaper, September 24th, 1831, said, "We are glad to find that the good sense of the people of New Haven has induced them to act promptly and vigorously in opposition to the ill-judged and unjustifiable enthusiasm of misguided zealots." A Richmond newspaper describes what New Haven had done as an admirable lesson, and the newspaper in Natchez, Mississippi, carried a piece in October 1831 that reads, "The attempt made by a convention in Philadelphia to establish a college in New Haven for the education of the blacks has been met by the citizens of the latter city in a spirit that will be duly appreciated by the people of the South." New Haven's decision to oppose the college was widely covered throughout the country and had real impact in national conversations. New Haven's action thwarted plans to promote education and liberation and reinforce the status quo of slavery and racial oppression. Garrison responded in poetry to what he called, quote, "the disgraceful proceedings," end quote, with lines that began, "New Haven, thou hast rashly done a deed. which shrouds thy glory in a black eclipse. New Haven's action had real impact in law and policy. The New Haven experience was cited by opponents of Prudence Crandall and her Academy for Black Women in Canterbury, Connecticut. Both the 1831 College and Prudence Crandall School were followed by severe reaction at the state legislature, which on May 24, 1833, passed what became known as the Black Law that prevented the education of blacks from out of state in Connecticut. Crandall was arrested, placed on trial. When it came to trial, the judge was David Daggett, Yale alum and former faculty who led the opposition to the college in 1831. The U.S. Supreme Court would draw on Daggett's ruling in their infamous Dred Scott decision of 1857. That decision cited Connecticut and Daggett's ruling that black people were not within the meaning of the word citizens in the Constitution of the United States. The actions in New Haven in 1831 had real impact, locally, statewide, and nationally. And the fact that the college was blocked had a real impact on generations whose access to higher education was limited. The Beinecke Library holds a pamphlet published by Simeon Jocelyn about the 1831 college proposal, its supporters, and the opposition. Jocelyn compiled it at the request of the Superintending Committee of Free Black New York leaders, including the Reverend Peter Williams, Thomas Downing, Peter Vogelsang, Boston Cromwell, and Philip A. Bell. This copy was owned by John Warner Barber, a New Haven engraver, historian, and abolitionist, one of the 4 whites to vote for the college. In his hand, it says, "To be carefully preserved." He knew this story needed to be told, needed to be remembered. 190 years later, let us remember. Let us engage this story of the past in our own present times. Let us make sure that the story shows what happened and why it is not forgotten. And more than that, let us consider what the Black College would have meant for New Haven and the nation. As you pass through the intersection of I-91 and I-95, think about the proposed Black College of 1831 and consider what could have been.